The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Alexander Reed's penthouse, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. At 62, Alex had everything money could buy, yet he stood by the window feeling oddly empty. $8.7 billion to his name, and still something was missing. He ran his hand through his silver-streaked hair and looked out at the city below. Tiny people scurried about like ants, each with their own story, their own struggles and joys. When was the last time he'd been part of that world? Really part of it? "Mr. Reed, your coffee." His assistant Grace placed the steaming cup on his desk. "And the board is expecting your call in 30 minutes. "Thank you," he said, not turning from the window. "Cancel it." Grace paused, her pen hovering over her tablet. "Sir? Cancel everything today." Alex finally turned, a strange light in his eyes that Grace hadn't seen before. "I need a day off. But the merger papers will still be there tomorrow." He smiled, feeling lighter already. "Sometimes we need to remember who we are beyond the boardroom, don't you think?" Grace nodded slowly, confused but professional as always. "Of course, sir. Anything else?" "That's all. Take the day off yourself if you'd like." After she left, Alex walked to the far corner of his living room, to a door he rarely opened anymore. Inside was a small room with a baby grand piano, a reminder of a life path not taken. He sat down and let his fingers touch the cool keys. No sound yet, just the familiar feel of possibility beneath his fingertips. Music had been his first love, long before technology made him wealthy. He'd been good, better than good. His old professor had once told him he had the rare gift of making people feel things they couldn't name. But practical choices led him away from concert halls and into coding, startups, and eventually empire building. He played a simple scale, the notes rising clear and true in the quiet room. It had been months since he'd last played. Years since he'd played for anyone else. An idea began to form. Crazy, perhaps. But wasn't that the luxury of wealth? The ability to be a little crazy sometimes? Alex left the piano room and went to his massive walk-in closet. Pushing past tailored suits and designer clothes, he dug into the far back where he kept old things he couldn't bring himself to throw away. He pulled out faded jeans, a worn navy sweater with a small hole near the cuff, and scuffed boots. From a drawer, he added a baseball cap from his alma mater. In his bathroom, he looked at himself in the mirror. The man who stared back was still clearly wealthy. Something in the perfect haircut, the expensive watch, the well-maintained skin. He removed the watch, messed up his hair, and found an old pair of glasses he sometimes wore instead of contacts. Better, but not quite right. He rummaged through a drawer and found a fake wedding band he'd once worn to deflect attention at a charity event after his divorce. He slipped it on, further building his disguise. From another drawer, he pulled out a worn leather wallet, removing all but $40 and a single credit card with his middle name on it. "Who are you today?" he asked his reflection. Not Alexander Reed, tech visionary and billionaire, but just Alex, a regular guy with some time to kill. He took the service elevator down to avoid his building's attentive doorman. The back exit led to a side street, and suddenly he was just another person on the sidewalk. No driver, no security detail, no assistant anticipating his needs. Just a man walking among other people. The freedom was intoxicating. He wandered for an hour, stopping for a street vendor coffee that was terrible compared to his usual custom roasted beans, but somehow more satisfying. He bought a hot dog from a cart and sat on a park bench to eat it, watching children play and couples stroll by. It was approaching noon when he found himself near Grand Central Station. He'd passed through it countless times, always in a rush, always with purpose. Today he had nowhere to be. On impulse, he walked inside. The vast main concourse opened before him, sunlight streaming through the massive windows, hitting the famous Constellation ceiling. People flowed around him, tourists with cameras, business people with determined expressions, families with excited children. The constant movement and noise created its own kind of music, a symphony of human activity. That's when he spotted it, a public piano tucked in a corner of the terminal. Part of some city arts initiative there for anyone to play. Right now it sat empty, almost invisible among the bustle. Alex felt a pull toward it like gravity. When was the last time he'd played music that wasn't in the privacy of his home? College, probably. Before the real world. Before responsibility and success and the isolation that came with it. He approached slowly, watching a young couple finish taking selfies with the piano as backdrop before moving on. They hadn't played a note, just used it as a prop for their social media lives. Alex felt a twinge of sadness at that. The bench was worn smooth from countless people sitting there before him. He touched the keys lightly, testing. The piano was far from the quality he was used to, slightly out of tune with a sticky E-flat key and signs of heavy use. But it had character. It had been played by hundreds of hands, each person adding their own small mark to its history. Alex sat down fully, setting his cheap coffee cup on the floor beside him. A few people glanced his way, but most rushed past, too busy with their own lives to notice another middle-aged man at the public piano. His fingers hovered over the keys, suddenly unsure. What would he play? And did he even remember how? It had been so long since he'd performed for anyone. The muscles in his hands seemed to tighten with anxiety. A small child stopped a few feet away, looking at him expectantly. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, with curious eyes and a Thomas the Tank Engine backpack. "Are you going to play something?" the boy asked. Alex smiled. "I'm thinking about it." "I'm learning piano," the boy said proudly. "I can play Mary Had a Little Lamb." "That's a good one to start with." The boy's mother appeared, taking his hand. "Sorry," she said to Alex. "He loves music." "No need to apologize," Alex replied. "Music lovers should stick together." He winked at the boy, who grinned back. As they walked away, Alex felt something loosen in his chest. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play a simple melody, Heart and Soul, the first song many people learn. His fingers remembered, even if they were softer now, lacking the calluses of his youth. The notes rang out, not perfectly, but clearly enough. A few more people glanced his way, but most continued their rushing. That was fine. He wasn't playing for them anyway. He transitioned into Beethoven's Für Elise, another familiar piece that many would recognize. His confidence grew with each measure, his body remembering what his mind had forgotten. The sticky E-flat key became a character to work around, a challenge that made the playing more engaging. More people slowed their pace now, some stopping briefly before continuing on their way. An older man with a cane paused longer, nodding in appreciation before his train announcement called him away. Alex closed his eyes, letting the music take him. He moved from classical pieces to jazz standards, then to Billy Joel's Piano Man, an appropriate choice for the setting that earned him his first small audience of a dozen or so people. A young woman in business attire checked her watch but didn't leave. A security guard on his round slowed down, pretending to scan the area while actually listening. Two teenagers removed their earbuds to hear the live music instead. For the first time in years, Alex felt truly seen, not for his wealth or his business acumen, but for this simple human thing he could do. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had to become anonymous to feel truly visible. As Piano Man came to an end, a smattering of applause broke out from the small gathering. Alex nodded his thanks, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the temperature in the station. He took a sip of his now cold coffee and flexed his fingers. They weren't used to this much playing anymore, but they were warming up nicely. The initial stiffness was giving way to muscle memory. What came next surprised even him. Without planning it, his fingers began playing the opening notes of a piece he'd composed himself decades ago, after his father died. He'd written it during his final year at music school, before he'd changed direction and entered the tech world. It had never been published, never recorded. It existed only in his memory and in a handwritten score buried somewhere in storage. The melody started softly, tentatively, like someone finding their way through grief. His father had been his biggest supporter, the one who bought him his first keyboard, who drove him to lessons even after working double shifts. The man who told him to follow his passion, but hadn't lived long enough to see where that passion ultimately led. As Alex played the deeply personal piece, everything else fell away. The station, the people, his billions, his companies. He was just a man at a piano, telling a story through music, the most universal language of all. He didn't notice as the crowd around him grew from a dozen to 30, then 50 people. He didn't see the phones raised to record the unexpected performance or the expressions on people's faces as the emotional complexity of the piece reached out to them. Alex was home again, in the place where notes and rhythm said what words couldn't, and he was just getting started. The crowd around Alex grew larger, though his father's song, that's how he always thought of it, flowed through him like a conversation with a ghost. The middle section of the piece swelled with anger, the notes almost argumentative, reflecting the rage he'd felt at losing his dad too soon. But then, as always, the melody softened into acceptance, into the bittersweet understanding that grief is just love with nowhere to go. A woman in a business suit wiped a tear from her cheek. A teenage boy lowered his phone, suddenly feeling that recording this moment was somehow cheapening it. An elderly man closed his eyes, perhaps thinking of his own losses, his own stories untold. When Alex finally opened his eyes, he was startled to find himself surrounded. 50, maybe 60 people stood in a loose semicircle, their faces open and vulnerable in a way rarely seen in the usually guarded city. For a moment, nobody spoke. Nobody clapped. The silence was a form of respect, an acknowledgement that what had just happened went beyond entertainment. A gray-haired woman in a MTA uniform broke the spell, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That was beautiful," she said simply. "Just beautiful." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. A few people finally began to applaud, the sound growing until it echoed off the station's high ceiling. Alex felt his cheeks flush. He hadn't played for an audience in over 30 years, and he'd certainly never received this kind of reaction. In boardrooms, people responded to his ideas with deference tinged with fear or ambition. This was different. This was genuine. "Play something else," called a young woman holding a violin case, clearly a musician herself. "Yeah, more," echoed several others. Alex smiled, surprised by how much he wanted to continue. "Any requests?" he asked, his voice sounding strange to his own ears, lighter, happier than it had in years. "Something happy," called out a child, making everyone laugh. Alex thought for a moment, then began to play a ragtime piece, his fingers stumbling slightly at first over the quick tempo, but soon finding their rhythm. The mood shifted, and people began to bob their heads and tap their feet. A few children started to dance, uninhibited in the way only kids can be. A businessman checked his watch, looked regretfully at the departures board, then set down his briefcase and stayed anyway. A pair of tourists who didn't speak English smiled widely, music transcending the language barrier. 2 police officers on patrol paused longer than necessary, exchanging glances that said they'd take a moment before moving on. As the ragtime piece ended, someone shouted, "Elton John!" Another voice called for Billy Joel. A third requested Mozart. Alex laughed, feeling like a human jukebox, and launched into a medley that somehow wove all three together. A classical opening that morphed into Piano Man, with hints of Rocket Man layered throughout. It wasn't perfect, but it was creative and fun, and the crowd loved it. The station's usual indifference was melting away, minute by minute. Strangers were talking to each other, comparing favorite songs, discussing other street performances they'd seen. A woman offered her granola bar to a man who mentioned he'd missed lunch. A businessman helped a mother fold her stroller when her toddler wanted to get down and dance. A professional-looking woman in her 40s approached the piano during a brief pause. "I don't mean to interrupt," she said, "but I teach music at the high school down the street. Would you mind if I recorded a bit for my students? We've been discussing improvisation and connecting with audiences." If she'd known who he really was, the request would have come with flattery, with hints about donations to the school's music program. But she was just one music lover talking to another, and Alex found that refreshing. "Sure," he said. "Any particular piece you'd like them to hear?" She thought for a moment. "Whatever moved you the most to play." Alex nodded and turned back to the keys. He began with Imagine by John Lennon, a song about vision and hope. As he played, he found himself adding flourishes that weren't in the original, letting the melody take him where it wanted to go. The teacher recorded discreetly, her face showing that she was getting exactly what she'd hoped for. A circle of teenagers had gathered now, drawn by their teacher or perhaps by the unusual crowd in the normally hurried station. They stood awkwardly at first, trying to maintain their cool indifference, but Alex could see it slipping as the music continued. One boy with blue-tipped hair began quietly singing the lyrics under his breath. A girl with dozens of bangles on her wrist closed her eyes, swaying slightly. The song ended, and Alex flexed his fingers. They were getting tired. He was out of practice, but he didn't want to stop. The feeling was too good, the connection too real. A man about Alex's age approached the piano, his manner hesitant. "Don't suppose you know any Springsteen?" he asked. "My wife and I had our first dance to Dancing in the Dark. Today's our anniversary, but she's working late." He gestured to the flowers he was carrying. "Thought I might surprise her, but her train's delayed." "Congratulations," Alex said, genuinely pleased for him. "Let's see if I remember it." He began to play, the familiar melody bringing a wide smile to the man's face. A few measures in, Alex paused and said to the crowd, "He's celebrating his anniversary today. Let's give him a hand." The crowd applauded. Several people calling out congratulations and asking how many years. 28, the man said, blushing but clearly pleased. "To 28 more," Alex said, raising an imaginary glass before continuing the song. As he played, he watched the man make a phone call. His face animated as he presumably told his wife about the impromptu celebration with strangers in Grand Central. It struck Alex that in all his billions he'd never bought a moment like this. Simple human connection, the joy of shared experience. More people stopped, the crowd now over 100 strong. Trains continued to arrive and depart, but the usual mad rush had transformed into something gentler. People were making room for each other, waiting their turn, holding doors. The music was changing the station's heartbeat, slowing it from a frantic sprint to a steadier, more deliberate rhythm. A small girl of about 7 approached the piano, her mother following close behind with an apologetic look. The girl had been twirling to the music but now stood still, looking intently at Alex. "Can I try?" she asked, pointing to the piano. Her mother began to pull her away. "Honey, the man is giving a performance. We can't interrupt." But Alex shook his head with a smile. "It's okay," he said. He scooted over on the bench and patted the spot beside him. "Come on up." The girl climbed up eagerly while her mother watched nervously. "She's only had a few lessons," she explained. "That's more than enough," Alex assured her. To the girl, he said, "What can you play?" "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," she answered proudly. "That's perfect."
"Want to play it together?"
She nodded, her face serious with concentration as she positioned her small fingers on the keys. Alex counted them in quietly, and they began to play the simple melody, his left hand providing a gentle accompaniment to her halting but earnest right hand. The crowd watched the unlikely duet with smiles, many taking pictures or videos. A newsstand worker left his post to see what was happening, and even a few of the station's more hurried commuters paused briefly before rushing off to their trains. When they finished, the girl beamed up at Alex. "That was good," she declared. "It was excellent," he agreed, high-fiving her. "You're going to be amazing if you keep practicing." As the girl rejoined her mother, Alex realized he'd been playing for nearly an hour. His back ached slightly from the unfamiliar posture, and his fingers were definitely feeling the strain. But he hadn't felt this alive in years. A station manager had appeared on the periphery of the crowd, and for a moment Alex worried he might be asked to stop. But the man was smiling, tapping his foot to the music. When he caught Alex's eye, he gave a thumbs up and mouthed, "Carry on." Alex nodded his thanks and turned back to the keys. What next? The crowd was waiting, expectant. He decided to return to his own composition, the one about his father, but this time he'd play the full piece. The first time he'd only played the beginning, too caught up in memories to continue. He took a deep breath and placed his hands on the keys. "This is something I wrote a long time ago," he said, his voice carrying surprisingly well. "It's called Letting Go." The opening notes were familiar now to those who'd been there from the start. But this time, Alex played beyond the opening into the heart of the composition. The middle section was complex, full of discord and resolution, like the messy process of grief itself. As he played, Alex felt something shift inside him. Each note was a release, each phrase a step toward something he'd been avoiding for too long. He'd built an empire of technology, of data and devices meant to connect people, yet here he was, making the most profound connection of his life with nothing but 88 keys and a room full of strangers. The final section of the piece was coming now, the part he'd never played for anyone, not even himself in recent years. It was hopeful without being naive, peaceful without denying the pain that came before. It was the musical equivalent of moving forward while carrying the past gently with you. And as his fingers struck the final chord, Alex knew with sudden clarity what he needed to do next. The crowd had grown to over 200 people now, their faces illuminated by the afternoon light streaming through Grand Central's massive windows. Alex's fingers continued to dance across the keys, playing his spontaneous composition with a freedom he hadn't felt in decades. This wasn't about perfection or performance, it was about expression, about finding his way back to something essential he'd lost. As the improvised piece came to its natural conclusion, Alex finally lifted his hands from the keys. For a moment, no one made a sound. Then applause erupted, echoing through the vaulted ceiling of the station. People who would normally rush past each other without a glance were now standing shoulder to shoulder, united by music and the rare experience of genuine connection in a city that often felt too busy for such moments. A woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes approached the piano. "That was extraordinary," she said. "Was that your own composition?" Alex nodded, feeling strangely vulnerable. In the boardroom, he projected nothing but confidence. Here, sharing something so personal felt like standing naked in public. "I'm Rose," she said. "I teach music at the conservatory uptown. We don't often hear new compositions with that level of emotional depth." She hesitated, then asked, "Have you recorded any of your work?" "No," Alex replied truthfully. "I compose for myself mostly. Or I used to anyway." "That's a shame," Rose said. "Music like that deserves to be heard." Before Alex could respond, a commotion at the edge of the crowd caught his attention. A news crew was making their way toward the piano, a reporter with a microphone leading the way while a cameraman followed behind. Alex felt a jolt of panic. He hadn't considered that his impromptu performance might attract media attention. For a wild moment, he considered simply getting up and walking away. His disguise was basic at best. If they put him on camera, someone who knew him might recognize him despite the casual clothes and messy hair. But leaving now would draw even more attention, and besides, he wasn't ready for this experience to end. The reporter, a woman with a professional smile and sharp eyes, approached the piano. "Hi there," she said. "I'm with Channel 5 News. We got a tip about an amazing pianist drawing crowds at Grand Central. Would you mind if we film a bit of your performance for the evening news?" Alex took a deep breath. "What exactly did you have in mind?" "Just a few minutes of you playing, maybe a quick interview about who you are and why you're here today," she said, glancing at her watch. "We're doing a segment on unexpected moments of beauty in the city. An interview was out of the question. If he spoke on camera, someone would surely recognize his voice. But playing? That might be safe enough. I'd rather not do an interview," he said, "but you're welcome to film me playing." The reporter looked disappointed but nodded. "That's fine. Could you play something while we set up the shot?" Alex turned back to the keys and began to play Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, a piece that captured the energy and spirit of New York itself. The familiar opening clarinet glissando, translated to piano, caught the attention of even more passers-by. The crowd continued to grow, people standing on tiptoes at the back to see over others' heads. The cameraman moved around, capturing different angles of Alex's hands. The worn piano, the rapt faces in the audience. Alex kept his head down, letting his hands be the focus. With any luck, his face wouldn't be clear enough for recognition. A young couple stood near the front, their arms around each other. The woman leaned her head on the man's shoulder as they swayed slightly to the music. An older gentleman closed his eyes, transported by the familiar melody to some private memory. Two small children sat cross-legged on the floor, looking up at the piano with wide-eyed wonder. As he played, Alex found himself thinking about the strange journey of his life. He'd left music behind to pursue technology, believing he had to choose one path or the other. The success that followed had exceeded his wildest dreams, but somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten why he wanted that success in the first place. It wasn't just about the money or the power. It was about creating something meaningful, about touching people's lives. Somehow he'd achieved everything he set out to do, and still lost sight of what mattered most. The camera crew finished their filming and packed up, the reporter giving him a grateful nod before they disappeared back into the crowd. Alex felt a mix of relief and something else, pride perhaps. Not in his wealth or status, but in this simple act of bringing music to a public space. A throat cleared beside him, and Alex looked up to see a station security guard. His first thought was that he was about to be asked to leave, but the guard was smiling. "Sorry to interrupt," the guard said, "but I've got a bit of a situation. There's an older gentleman over there." He gestured to the edge of the crowd. "Who says he knows you?" "Says he's an old professor of yours. I told him I'd check with you before letting him through." Alex felt a flutter of anxiety. An old professor? He hadn't been a student in over 40 years. Who could possibly? And then he saw him standing at the edge of the crowd. Professor Thomas, his piano instructor from college. The man must be in his 90s now. His once tall frame slightly stooped, his hair completely white. But the eyes were the same. Sharp, observant, missing nothing. For a moment, Alex considered denying any connection. His disguise wouldn't fool someone who had known him well, even decades ago. But something in the old man's posture, the eager way he was looking toward the piano, made Alex nod to the guard. "Yes," he said. "He was my teacher. Please let him through." The guard helped Professor Thomas navigate through the crowd. As he approached, Alex stood from the piano bench, uncertain what to say. The last time they had spoken was at Alex's final recital, before he announced he was changing his major from music to computer science. The professor had been disappointed, had told him he was making a mistake. Would he now feel vindicated, seeing his former student playing in a train station instead of a concert hall? "Alexander," the old man said, his voice softer than Alex remembered, but still carrying that same precise diction. "I thought it was you. I was on my way to meet my granddaughter for lunch when I heard the music. That piece about your father, I remember when you first composed it." Alex swallowed hard. "Professor Thomas, it's been a long time." "Too long," the old man agreed. "May I?" He gestured to the piano bench. Alex moved aside, and Professor Thomas sat down slowly, his movements careful but deliberate. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play. Bach's Prelude in C major, the very first piece he had assigned to Alex all those years ago. Despite his age, his fingers were still nimble, his timing perfect. The crowd watched in respectful silence as the elderly man played, his face lit with the same passion Alex had once known him for. When he finished, he looked up at his former student with a small smile. "You've done well for yourself," he said quietly. "I've followed your career. Not the path I would have chosen for you, but impressive nonetheless." Alex felt a pang of shame. "I'm sorry I let the music go." The old professor shook his head. "But you didn't, not really. It's still in you. I can hear it," he gestured to the crowd. "They can hear it too." A young woman stepped forward, offering her hand to help Professor Thomas stand. "That was beautiful," she said. "Are you two performing together?" The professor laughed. No. I'm just an old teacher who happened to recognize a former student." He turned to Alex. "Though I wouldn't say no to a duet for old time's sake." Alex felt a lump in his throat. "I'd be honored." They settled on Mozart's Sonata for two pianos in D major, rearranged for a single instrument. It had been their last performance together before Alex changed his path. As they began to play, years fell away. Alex was a student again, learning from the master, but also a partner now, bringing his own interpretation to the familiar piece. The crowd watched in wonder as the two men, separated by nearly 40 years in age but united by music, played together with a synchronicity that could only come from deep understanding. Their hands moved across the keys, sometimes crossing, sometimes mirroring each other, creating a conversation in notes that needed no words. When they finished, the applause was thunderous. Professor Thomas beamed, looking more energized than when he'd arrived. He turned to Alex with a twinkle in his eye. "You still have it," he said. "All these years and you never lost it." "I forgot it," Alex admitted. "There's a difference, as perhaps," the professor conceded. "But what is forgotten can be remembered." He glanced at his watch. "I should go. My granddaughter will be wondering where I am." He stood carefully. "Don't wait another 40 years to play again, Alexander. The world needs your music." As Professor Thomas made his way back through the crowd, helped by the same security guard, Alex felt something shift inside him. For decades, he had defined himself by what he built, what he owned, what he controlled. But sitting here at this battered public piano, he had created something that couldn't be measured in dollars or market share, moments of genuine human connection. A young man approached next, clutching a smartphone. "Sorry to bother you," he said, "but that video I took earlier of you playing, it's going viral." Like seriously viral. Over 10,000 views in the last hour. Alex felt a flutter of alarm. Video? The young man nodded eagerly, turning his phone so Alex could see. There he was, head bowed over the keys, playing his father's composition. The angle was mostly of his hands and the side of his face, not immediately recognizable, but still. People are loving it, the young man continued. The comments are blowing up. Everyone wants to know who you are. As Alex stared at the small screen watching himself play, a question formed in his mind. Who was he, really? The billionaire CEO whose face appeared in business magazines? Or the musician who had just moved hundreds of strangers to tears? Maybe it was time to find out. The young man with the phone was still talking excitedly about view counts and shares, but Alex barely heard him. His mind was racing with the implications of going viral. How long before someone recognized him? What would happen when his board members or shareholders saw Alexander Reed, tech billionaire and CEO, playing piano in street clothes at a train station? Hey, are you okay? The young man asked, noticing Alex's distraction. Yes, fine, Alex said, forcing a smile, just surprised by all the attention. An older woman who had been standing nearby stepped forward. You shouldn't be surprised, she said kindly. What you're doing here is special. In a city where everyone's always rushing somewhere else, you made us all stop and really be here. She gestured to the crowd. Look around. You've created a community out of strangers. Alex followed her gaze. The woman was right. The usual hurried indifference of the station had transformed. People were talking to each other, making space for children to sit up front, offering seats to the elderly. Someone had bought coffee for the station's cleaning staff so they could take a break and listen too. A group of teenagers who looked like they might normally be glued to their phones were engaged in an animated discussion about the music. Thank you for that observation, Alex said sincerely. I needed to hear it. He turned back to the piano, his fingers finding the keys again. What to play now? Something that captured this moment of connection, of unexpected community. He settled on Bridge Over Troubled Water, a song about supporting each other through difficult times. As the familiar melody filled the air, people began to sing along softly. A businessman in an expensive suit next to a woman in a fast food uniform, a grandmother with her teenage grandchild. Two tourists who seemed to barely speak English but knew every word of the song. Their voices blended together, growing stronger with each verse. Alex felt goosebumps rise on his arms. In all his years of wealth and power, he'd never created anything quite like this. A moment of pure harmony among people who had nothing in common except being in the same place at the same time. A tap on his shoulder interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see a station manager looking apologetic. Sorry to bother you, sir, the manager said, but we've got a bit of a situation. Your playing has attracted so many people that it's creating crowd control issues. The fire marshal is concerned about blocking emergency exits. Alex's heart sank. Do I need to stop? The manager shook his head quickly. No, actually, we have a proposal. There's a larger open area near the main concourse with better crowd flow, and there's a much nicer piano there. It was donated by Steinway last year. Would you be willing to move your performance? Alex hesitated. Moving to a more prominent location meant more visibility, more risk of being recognized. But looking at the eager faces around him, he couldn't bring himself to end the experience yet. Lead the way, he said, standing up from the bench. The crowd cheered when the manager announced the move. As Alex followed him through the station, people trailed behind like a parade, phones recording the unusual procession. The station staff had clearly been busy. They'd set up a small area with velvet ropes to create a performance space around a gleaming black grand piano. This is quite an upgrade, Alex said, running his hand over the polished surface. Only the best for the man who's bringing Grand Central to a standstill, the manager replied with a grin. There hasn't been this much excitement in the station since Vanderbilt owned it. Alex settled onto the bench, adjusting it to the right height. This piano was worlds away from the worn upright he'd been playing. The action was perfect, the tone rich and resonant. He began with a few scales to get a feel for it, and even these simple runs sounded magnificent in the station's natural acoustics. The crowd, now grown to several hundred, waited expectantly. Alex looked out at the sea of faces and felt a strange mix of emotions. Nervousness, yes, but also a deep satisfaction. For the first time in years, people weren't looking at him because of his wealth or power. They simply wanted to hear him play. He launched into Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, letting the familiar notes flow through him. The piece had always spoken to him of solitude and reflection, of finding beauty in melancholy. As he played, he thought about the solitary nature of his life at the top. He had assistants and employees and business partners, but few real friends, no family since his divorce. How had he let that happen? The sonata's haunting melody echoed through the vast space of the main concourse, reaching even those passing through who hadn't intended to stop. Many did stop, though, drawn by the unexpected beauty in this place of transition and hurry. When he finished, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Alex nodded his thanks, then, without pause, shifted into something completely different, a lively ragtime piece that had people tapping their feet and smiling. He wanted to show range, to give them a full experience of what music could be. A young woman in a waitress uniform who had been standing near the piano approached during a brief pause between songs. "I don't mean to interrupt," she said, "but I just got off my shift and I sing with a jazz band on weekends. Would it be too bold to ask if I could sing while you play?" Alex smiled. "Not bold at all. What would you like to sing?" They settled on Summertime, the Gershwin classic. As Alex played the introduction, the young woman closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and then began to sing. Her voice was extraordinary, rich and soulful, with perfect control and deep emotion. The crowd fell completely silent, captivated by the unexpected duet. As they performed together, Alex marveled at how easily they connected through the music, two strangers creating something beautiful together. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous. The singer bowed, beaming, then leaned down to whisper to Alex, "Thank you for that. I've got an audition tomorrow that I've been nervous about, but now I feel ready." "You're going to be amazing," Alex told her, meaning it. "They'd be crazy not to hire you." She squeezed his shoulder in thanks and stepped back into the crowd, immediately surrounded by people complimenting her performance. As the afternoon wore on, more collaborations happened spontaneously. A man with a harmonica joined Alex for a blues number. A group of high school choir students on a field trip performed while he accompanied them. A dancer cleared a small space and interpreted one of his classical pieces through movement. Each collaboration seemed to energize the crowd more. People who would normally hurry past each other without a glance were now talking, sharing stories, exchanging contact information. The station had transformed from a place people passed through to a place where community was happening. Alex's phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. Whatever was happening in his regular life could wait. This moment, this unexpected, beautiful moment, deserved his full attention. A distinguished-looking man in his 70s approached the piano next. "I don't want to impose," he said, "but I couldn't help noticing the Chopin you played earlier. I used to be with the Philharmonic, and Chopin was always my favorite to conduct. Would you indulge an old musician and play the Ballade No. 1 in G minor?" "It would be my pleasure," Alex replied, impressed by the specific request. The ballade was challenging, a piece that required both technical skill and emotional depth. As he began to play, he saw the former conductor close his eyes, his hands making small movements as if he were still leading an orchestra. The piece built gradually, its complexity growing with each passage. Alex felt his technique returning more fully now, hours of playing awakening muscle memories long dormant. When he reached the thunderous final section, his fingers flew across the keys with a confidence that surprised even him. The applause that followed was different somehow, more knowing, more appreciative of the difficulty of what they'd just heard. The former conductor opened his eyes, a look of genuine respect on his face. "Masterfully played," he said. "You could have had a career on the concert stage." Alex smiled. "Life took me in a different direction, but not away from music entirely, it seems." "No," Alex agreed. "Not entirely." As the conductor moved away, Alex noticed a commotion at the edge of the crowd. His heart sank as he recognized his assistant Grace pushing her way through, her expression a mix of relief and exasperation. Behind her was Rob, his head of security, looking thoroughly professional but clearly unhappy. They had found him. His day of anonymity was coming to an end. Grace reached the piano first. "Mr. Reed," she said quietly, using his real name, "we've been looking everywhere for you. Your phone has been off and you missed the call with Tokyo. The board is asking questions." "How did you find me?" Alex asked, though he already knew the answer. Grace held up her phone showing the viral video. It's all over social media. Some of the comments identified you. She glanced around nervously at the crowd. What are you doing here? Before Alex could answer, a ripple of whispers spread through the nearby listeners who had overheard Grace use his name. Reed, like Alexander Reed, the tech guy? The billionaire? No way, that can't be him. Rob stepped closer, positioning himself protectively beside Alex. Sir, we should go. This could become a security situation. Alex looked out at the crowd, seeing the change already happening in their faces, the simple appreciation for music being replaced by curiosity, by the recognition of wealth and status. The magic of the day was evaporating before his eyes, yet something inside him rebelled at the thought of leaving. He had created something valuable here, something that had nothing to do with money or power. Did he have to give that up just because his real identity had been discovered? Alex turned back to the keys and began to play again. His own composition, the one about his father. The one that had started this whole extraordinary day. The whispering continued, but as the music filled the space again, something shifted. People were drawn back to the moment, to the emotion in the notes rather than the net worth of the man playing them. As the final chords faded, Alex knew what he had to do next. As the last notes of his father's song faded away, Alex stood up from the piano bench. The crowd, now aware of his true identity, watched in hushed anticipation. Would he leave? Would he say something? The magic of the anonymous musician was gone, replaced by the curiosity that always surrounded the ultra-wealthy. Sir, Rob whispered urgently, the car is waiting. We really should go. Grace nodded in agreement, her tablet already in hand. I've rescheduled the Tokyo call for tonight, but the board meeting tomorrow morning is non-negotiable. Alex looked at them both, his efficient, protective staff who kept his business life running smoothly. Then he looked back at the crowd, at the faces of people who had been moved by his music before they knew who he was. He made a decision. I'm not leaving yet, he said quietly but firmly. There's something I need to do first. He turned to face the gathering, which had grown to nearly 1,000 people spread throughout the main concourse. Phones were pointed at him from every direction. Whatever he did next would be recorded, shared, discussed. For a man who had carefully maintained his privacy despite his wealth, it was a strange feeling. I owe you all an explanation, he began, his voice carrying surprisingly well in the vast space. My name is Alexander Reed, a murmur ran through the crowd as those who hadn't overheard earlier now realized, who had been playing for them all afternoon. I came here today looking for something I'd lost. Alex continued. Not my wealth or status, I never lost those. I lost something more valuable. I lost music. I lost connection. I lost the ability to create something that matters in a way that spreadsheets and stock prices never will. He gestured to the piano behind him. Today you all gave me a gift. You stopped your busy lives to listen, to feel, to be present with each other and with me. You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place, because it brings people together in a way nothing else can. An older woman near the front called out, and you gave us a gift too. Best day I've had in years. Laughter and applause rippled through the crowd. Alex smiled, genuinely touched. I'm glad to hear that, he said, and I'd like to return the favor properly. He turned to Grace. Call the Steinway people. I want to donate 10 pianos like this one to public spaces around the city. Train stations, parks, hospitals, places where people need a moment of beauty in their day. Grace blinked in surprise but made a note on her tablet. Right away, Mr. Reed. And call my foundation, Alex continued, warming to his idea. I want to establish a fund for music education in public schools. Let's start with $5 million and see what the needs are. A cheer went up from the crowd. Alex held up his hands. But money isn't the point, he said when the noise died down. The point is connection. The point is remembering what makes us human in a world that often feels too fast, too impersonal, too focused on the wrong things. He turned back to the piano and sat down again. I have time for one more piece before I go back to being a CEO, he said. Any requests? Dozens of suggestions were called out from the crowd. Alex smiled, enjoying the enthusiasm, then held up his hand again. I heard someone say Imagine by John Lennon, he said. That seems fitting. As he began to play the iconic opening notes, a hush fell over the station once again. The simple, hopeful melody seemed to reach every corner of the vast space. People who had been rushing to catch trains slowed their steps, Tourists stopped taking photos of the architecture to listen. Station workers paused in their duties. A woman near the front began to sing the lyrics softly. Others joined in, their voices gaining strength with each verse. By the chorus, hundreds were singing together. People of all ages, backgrounds, and walks of life united by the universal message of the song. Alex felt something shift inside him as he played. The division between Alexander Reed the billionaire and Alex the musician was healing, the two parts of himself no longer at war. He could be both. He should be both. As the song ended, the applause was thunderous, echoing off the walls and ceiling of Grand Central. Alex stood and bowed, truly moved by the response. He hadn't felt this alive, this connected to other people in decades. An elderly custodian approached the piano, cap in hand. "Mr. Reed, sir," he said hesitantly. "I've worked here for 32 years and I've never seen anything like what happened today. You made this old station feel new again." Alex reached out to shake the man's hand. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "It means a lot." More people came forward wanting to share what the impromptu concert had meant to them. A mother whose autistic son had remained engaged with the music for hours, when he usually couldn't focus on anything for more than minutes. A recent widower who said it was the first time he'd felt joy since losing his wife. A stressed medical student who had missed her train on purpose to keep listening. Each story touched Alex deeply, reminding him of the human impact that his wealth and business success rarely achieved. He'd built products that people used, yes, but had he really made their lives better in ways that mattered? Grace approached again, looking apologetic. "Mr. Reed, I hate to interrupt, but we really do need to go. The car has been waiting for over an hour, and security is concerned about the growing crowd." Alex nodded, acknowledging that his day of freedom was coming to an end. "Just one more minute," he said. He turned back to the piano and placed his hands on the keys one last time. Without playing a note, he simply sat there, memorizing the feeling, the smooth ivory beneath his fingers, the eager faces watching him, the rare sense of doing exactly what he was meant to do. Then he stood up, gave a final wave to the crowd and allowed Rob to escort him toward the exit. People applauded as he walked past, some reaching out to touch his arm or shake his hand. A few called out thanks or asked when he would play again. Soon, he found himself promising, "I'll be back soon." As they reached the station's exit, a reporter stepped into their path, microphone extended. "Mr. Reed, can you tell us what inspired today's performance? Was this a planned publicity stunt for your company?" Alex shook his head, amused by the question. "No publicity stunt," he said. "Just a man remembering who he used to be before the world told him who he should be." The reporter looked confused, but Alex didn't elaborate. Some things weren't meant to be explained to those who hadn't experienced them. Outside, his usual Blacktown car waited at the curb. The driver jumped out to open the door, his face showing relief at finally having his employer back. Rob did a quick security check of the vehicle, while Grace briefed Alex on the calls and meetings he'd missed. But as Alex was about to step into the car, he paused. Through the station's large windows, he could still see the crowd inside, still gathered around the piano where another person had now taken a seat. The music continued. A new player, but the same spirit of connection. "Change of plans," Alex said suddenly. "I'm not going back to the office today." Grace looked up from her tablet, startled. "But sir, the Tokyo call can be handled by Thomas," Alex said, referring to his COO. "He knows the details as well as I do." "And the board meeting tomorrow?" "I'll be there," Alex promised. "But right now I need to do something else." He turned to his driver. "Take me home first. I need to pick something up." An hour later, Alex walked through the front door of Children's Hospital, carrying a small digital piano under his arm. He'd called ahead, and the hospital administrator met him in the lobby, trying to hide her surprise at seeing one of the city's wealthiest men in jeans and a worn sweater, looking nothing like his polished public image. "Mr. Reed, this is unexpected," she said. "We're honored, of course. Your foundation's donations have been instrumental in our new cancer wing." "I'm not here as a donor today," Alex said. "I'm here as a musician. I was hoping I could play for some of the kids." The administrator's face softened. "They would love that. We have a recreation room on the 3rd floor where many of our long-term patients gather in the evenings." As Alex set up his piano in the brightly colored room, children began to arrive, some walking, some in wheelchairs, some pushed in beds. Their faces lit up at the prospect of live music. at the break in their hospital routine. "Any requests?" Alex asked, just as he had at the station. "Disney songs," called a little girl with no hair and a bright pink hat. "Baby Shark," shouted a boy with a cast on his leg.